Presentation, I want to introduce natural language processing. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at language and communication. We're going to look at language as a tool, and we're going to look at some things that are challenging when it comes to language processing, especially when it comes to computers, but also when it comes to human beings. Tomorrow or next time, then, we will have a look at more technical aspects of natural language processing, such as parsing and parts of speech tagging and those sorts of things. So let's start out by saying a few things about natural language processing. It is a key area in AI. It is huge. It encompasses NLP tasks proper, as well as human-robot collaboration and human-robot interaction. There are major conferences dedicated to NLP, the ACL conference, and then the major AAAI conference has a huge NLP track. And it's just a huge area of research. Here are some examples of NLP tasks. So information retrieval, think about Google. To a certain degree, does information retrieval. There are ways to do that with keyword searches, but more sophisticated information retrieval, so it depends on parsing sentences. We will soon study Watson, IBM Watson, which is unbelievably almost 10 years old, and so look at some of the stuff that they did to do information retrieval and other things. Document summarization, language translation, many tasks. Human-robot collaboration. So imagine, your car is a robot, especially if you were to own a Tesla, and you communicate it with in different ways. You collaborate, solving problems such as taking an exit at an interstate that it may not have seen. Human-robot interaction is more the interactive side of collaborating or talking to a robot. They do a lot with assistive technology there, say for the elderly or for people who are ill. So before we get into technical details of NLP, let's put NLP into perspective. So John Searle, we read his article in which he proposed the Chinese room experiment. He was part of a research movement that in the 60s investigated language, and decided that language, or not decided, but pointed out that language is really a tool. We use it to communicate, and communication is very important. So the book that he wrote is called Speech Acts, but he wrote many other books, and other people wrote books and articles to turn around the view of language, which until they did their work was looked as primarily sentences that can be assigned truth values. The moon is made of green cheese or something like that. All right, so let's have a look at that. While yes, a lot of language is about informing others. Think about Wikipedia, textbooks, things like this. And again, those sentences that are designed to inform others are typically can be assigned a truth value, say true or false. However, there's clearly more. So think about things as basic as acknowledgement. So in a phone conversation, or in a video chat where maybe you turned off the video feature, it's sort of frustrating to talk and not know whether the other person is still there, so to speak, is still paying attention. It's the same thing for a phone conversation, right? So a lot of times we say yes, or or right, or other words to acknowledge that what the other person is saying, to indicate, yeah, we're still there. When texting, we a lot of times use emojis to indicate that that we got something. Well, there are commands, right? So if there's a strict hierarchy, think about the military, and if there's a wartime situation, well, their commands are very common. But there are commands everywhere. We see them by the side of the road. Do not litter. Go 50 miles an hour, not faster, or about 50 miles an hour. There are promises. Maybe you'll have a team meeting or something like this, and it says, hey, I'll call you tomorrow, I'll text you tomorrow. Questions, of course, right? Do you see the variety in speech acts? Things like that. So many things And part of the issue, obviously, of communication is to figure out, did somebody just give me a command? Did they inform me? Did I make a promise? And so like we act to things differently. All right, so very good. So hopefully we understand now that language is a tool, a very valuable tool. We know that language can hurt, right? So that alone should tell you that that it is a tool. So what are some of the things that are challenging? So even when we try to inform somebody, well, not even, when we try to inform somebody, there are some serious challenges. So let's assume we want to wish to inform someone of some fact. And so here's a basic workflow, right? I mean, there's a speaker, there's a hearer, and then there's an utterance. So well, let's understand what's going on here. So a sophisticated speaker or communicator really may decide to choose their words wisely. So advertisement is really about communication, right? Not just words, by the way, but also symbols, signs, and slogans, music, things like this. And so people in the advertising business spend, especially when it comes to slogans for companies, spend a lot of time figuring out which words to use, asking focus groups, about feedback and those sorts of things. But let's not go there. Let's simply think about some of the stuff that we do. So the words that we choose for the utterance certainly depend on many things, right? They depend on our own vocabulary. Which words do we know? But again, they also depend on the hearer's vocabulary. You might talk to, say, a young child differently than to a university president. Similarly, typically you try to convey something. So there are the concepts that you understand. So typically we try not to convey concepts that we don't know anything about. And then the expected concepts that the hearer understands. So think about the way we do education, like we have Calc 1, then Calc 2, then Calc 3, right? And so there's a reason for that. We have 120, 220, and 230, and we wouldn't want to reverse these things because a later course depend on some of the stuff that you learned in earlier courses. And then there is the expected belief system of the hearer as well as the belief system of the speaker, right? So you might want to communicate something that you believe, but maybe you know that the belief system of the hearer is a little bit different. So you would use different words or different concepts to try to convince them of something. So quite complex, right? Now there are some other things that influence the words that we use. So again, we're still with the speaker over here. So yes, we have all the stuff that we consider, but what are some other things? Well, it may depend on the situation. If it's an emergent situation, you probably don't mince your words. You don't spend a lot of time on choosing your words. You just blurt out, there is a whatever, and to warn the hearer. There are certain semantic and syntactic conventions. You speak to a child differently than you might speak to friends or your boss, those sorts of things. There are also the speaker's goals. What do you want to do? What's your objective here, your MO as part of this communication? The rationality, how sane are they really? And as well as the expected rationality of the hearer. So, partly we already talked about that is the belief system. So let's have a closer look at the workflow diagram. So what are some of the things that need to happen here? So suppose the speaker S decides to inform the hearer H of some fact that they believe to be true. Again, let's assume S chooses their words wisely. So S then utters the words. H perceives these words. This is in a given context. H might infer possible meanings of the utterance. Hopefully they think about this a little bit and then decide on an intended meaning from the speaker. And then eventually they incorporate something into the knowledge base, either the fact or maybe something about the speaker. So what are some of the things that can go wrong in this process? So let's have a look at these items in detail, or in turn. Speaker S decides to inform hearer H of some fact P. Well, maybe here the H already knows P, in which case, the speaker might look silly, or the hearer might think ill of the speaker, or maybe they think well of them, say, thanks for reminding me of that. Maybe H is just not interested in learning about P. Maybe S is insincere. They try to lie to this person. Again, so those are some things that can go wrong, and we as the hearer need to evaluate some of this stuff, right? Especially when it comes to sincerity. Again, S may choose its words wisely or not. They may just blurt it out, right? Which is of course tricky, when it's a sensitive situation. So S utters its words, and so what are some of the things that can go wrong here? Well, the words just come out the wrong way. Sometimes that happens to us. We try to say something and other words come out. Maybe there's just plain background noise and we just don't hear it. A train goes by, right? Train whistle. Maybe S mutters. Maybe S has a mask on and it's very hard to hear. So let's move on then to the hearer. So H perceives the words in a given context. So maybe H just misinterprets the context. Maybe H thinks, oh, they just told me something, like they gave me a command, but they just simply wanted to inform them of something. Passive aggressiveness sort of like figures into this thing a little bit. Sometimes people who are passive aggressive will utter something that has the form of a statement, but it's really a command. Maybe some other hearer H prime overhears this thing as actually not the intended target of the utterance, so they kind of have to figure that out. So H infers possible meanings, right, based on the utterance. So there is a lot of place or opportunity for ambiguity, right? It depends on the context in which the utterance was made. It depends on the perceived intention of the speaker. It depends on the background of what the hearer knows. It maybe the words, even though they were chosen wisely, it turns out that they were actually ambiguous, something that we may not have perceived when we uttered the words or when we chose the words. H infers the intended meaning of one of these perceived meanings, possible meanings. And again, based on the context, their own background, and perhaps other cues, they choose this thing. And of course, things can go wrong. Ideally, H, so like if it's a fact, incorporates that meaning into the knowledge base. But then there are things, they may forget it, they may refuse to acknowledge that P is true, they may contest it. So those are all things that are part of communication, part of this tool that can or cannot go wrong. And we have undoubtedly been in a situation where we were exposed to all of them. All right, so moving on a little bit then, some other challenges in NLP. So these are a little bit more, well, I don't know whether they're a little bit more technical, but they are somewhat technical. So we know that natural language can be ambiguous. We try to make a good effort in communicating something, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. So here's some sentences that could be considered newspaper headlines. Squad helps dog bite victim. All right. Helicopter powered by human flies. So yes, ambiguities, right? And so how do we realize the ambiguities? How do we, maybe chuckle a little bit at those two sentences, at the alternate meanings? Well, we need to have some background knowledge. We kind of need to have some knowledge about the world works. So we know that typically police squads do not intend for victims to get bitten even further. I mean, it's to help and to protect. I mean, a lot of police departments have that sort of motto. Helicopter powered by human flies. So again, it seems like an interesting experiment. I'm sure something that we thought of when we were kids, to have this device that has all these flies in it that lifts us up, right? But we kind of know that, probably is not going to work. But in order to figure that out, we just need to know a lot about the way the world works and in a fairly sophisticated way, right? Groucho Marx, time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like banana, right? It's just funny. And need to figure out what flies means over here. And the interesting thing is, we kind of know that, when we toss something, it sort of like has a, it moves in a parabola, which of course is sort of like a banana looks like. So Anaphora is when we use pronouns to refer back to entities already introduced in the text. So some of these things are sort of like fairly simple, right? After Mary proposed to John, they found a preacher and got married. So who's they? Mary and John. So we kind of know that it has to be two people, right? And so we need to find those two people. For the honeymoon, they went to Hawaii. So notice that this pronoun refers to not something in this current sentence, but in the prior sentence. So we need to sort of keep track of the dialogue, of the conversation that's going on. Here's something a little bit more sophisticated. Mary saw a ring through the window and asked John for it. Again, we need background knowledge here. We need common sense knowledge that typically people don't ask other people for windows. If the choice is between a window and a ring, well, they ask for a ring, right? So again, we need to know a little bit about context. We need to realize that maybe they're married or they're about to be married, and they ask for a ring or something like this rather than a window. Indexicality. So what we have over here is sentences, a lot of times that use pronouns. We need to know who uttered the sentence in order to be able to figure out the meaning of the sentence. So if I say I am over here, we need to actually know two things, right? Who said it and where did they say it? So we need to know about place and time. Why did you do that? Okay, again, who is you? Who is being addressed? And what does that mean? So we need to have context to figure out the whole story here. So if we were to represent this thing, we need to add some meta information. We need to sort of have some information about the actors that were part of this conversation or this utterance history. Think about a play where it says always indicates this person says, that person says, this person says, that person says. So who uttered the sentence? When and where was it uttered? So it needs to be time tagged and place tagged. And again, anybody else who's referenced or referred to in the utterance, we kind of need to know who that was. So it's called the situation, and we need to sort of keep track of that in order to be able to disambiguate or understand those sentences. Metonymy is where we use one noun phrase to stand for another one. So here's an example. I've read Shakespeare. Well, again, background knowledge is something that we need over here because we kind of need to know that who Shakespeare was, and that we can't really read people. I mean, certainly not in the sense that this is indicated over here. I mean, we sort of try to read people, but a lot of times we sort of try to read their emotional state. Chrysler announced record profits. Well, Chrysler in this particular example, it could be Chrysler who founded Chrysler, but they probably mean the company. So how does a company announce something? So we kind of need to figure, again, background knowledge is really key. So let's move on to another one. Here is metaphor. So in some countries, some cultures, metaphors are used more often than another. So for example, in Germany, people love to use metaphors. I mean, even on the newscasts, people use lots of metaphors. Here's some examples. It's raining cats and dogs. Life is a roller coaster. My big brother is a couch potato. Laughter is the music of the soul. So some of them are a little bit different than others. So how do you disambiguate or figure out 1 and 3, right? What does it mean to rain cats and dogs? What does it mean to be a couch potato? Well, you kind of need to hear it once and somebody needs to explain to you, or it needs to be obvious from the context of what this stuff means. And then you kind of know what that meaning, what the meaning is of this metaphor. Some other things you can probably figure out. I mean, if you know what a roller coaster is and somebody says life is a roller coaster, well, by analogy, you can probably figure out, well, it sounds like life is going up and down. Laughter is the music of the soul. Same thing. You can sort of you know what music is, and presumably you like music. You kind of know what the soul is, and you say, oh, okay. I can sort of figure out by analogical reasoning what this thing means. But again, going back to this thing, and we'll have one more slide about this, there's a huge amount of background knowledge that is necessary to do NLP right. Now there's reasoning, there's inference involved in this thing. So there was a book written by some very influential people working in NLP, and they pretty much said, well, or stated that in order to sort of like solve the next step, the next challenges of natural language processing, we need to bring in background knowledge, common sense knowledge. We'll talk about common sense knowledge in more detail a little bit later in this course. But once you bring in knowledge, you got to bring in inference, because you got to combine some statement that is made, some sentence with something else. And inference is notoriously hard. So that's kind of like where NLP is right now. So like trying to figure out, how do we bring in background knowledge? How do we bring in inference to sort of like understand some of these subtleties over here? Okay, so here's another challenge. It is called the Winograd Schema Challenge. It's named after Terry Winograd, who wrote a book, a key book in 1972 called Understanding Natural Language. And he actually, in this book, sort of like gave one of the examples of what these people are interested in. And then later on, some people sort of like named this challenge after him. So this challenge is designed to test not just NLP processing, but also reasoning. So what we have seen in the prior slides, there's just a huge amount of reasoning involved in order to understand ambiguous language, and language is inherently ambiguous. So here's an example that was actually given in Terry's book. The city councilmen refused the demonstrators a permit because they feared violence, advocated violence. So the challenge here is it's the same words, except in one sentence you use the word feared, and the other one is you use a different word, advocated, and they're typically not synonyms. Many times they're antonyms. So in order to solve this thing, we clearly need to resolve Anaphora. So what does they mean? Is it the city councilmen or is it the demonstrators? But so let's pick one sentence. The city councilmen refused the demonstrators a permit because they feared violence. So who feared violence? The demonstrators or the city councilmen? Well, since the permit was denied, presumably based on our knowledge about the way the world works, we would assume that they refers to the city councilmen. The city councilmen refused to demonstrate the permit because they advocated violence. So who advocated violence? Who is the they? Again, so like the way the world works, we sort of like assume, well, the city councilmen, probably not people who advocate violence. Maybe, and many demonstrators are fine people demonstrating in peace. But we also know that they're demonstrators who just want to incite violence. And so we sort of like assume that they probably refers to the demonstrators, so some bad actors. So that's a challenge here, right? And we only change one word, and so suddenly everything else is the same. So that's what the Winograd Schema Challenge is all about. And I think some of you are probably going to present a little bit on this in your cutting-edge work presentations. So resolving this ambiguity requires inference as well as common sense, knowledge, and reasoning about the world. Alrighty, folks, that's it for this presentation. I will talk to you later. Bye.